Welcome, and thank you for being with us on the 10th anniversary of National Forest Week with the theme, Celebrating Our Forests, Continuously Giving. The afforestation areas are situated in the West Swale, Yorath Island Glacial Spillway, a sacred site in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Those who entered into Treaty 6 are the Nahiawak, Cree, Nakawe, Saulteaux, and the Yankton and Yankatoni Nakota people. May our relationships with the land, standing peoples, forests, and waters teach us to honor and respect the past and invite us to move forward in harmony. May we all come together as friends to find inspiration and guidance from histories, languages, and cultures which broaden our understanding and community collaboration for the present and the future. We are beyond excited when Dr. Colin Laroque accepted our invitation to be with us today. Dr. Laroque is an environmental scientist with the University, Agriculture and Bioresources College. An exciting new app has been developed to calculate the carbon offset value of shelterbelts, invaluable this day of age of climate action as we experience our fourth year of drought in a row. Climate carbon measures may benefit landowners with the potential for cash in the pocket from the Saskatchewan government in 2022 for offsetting carbon. Thank you for being with us tonight. We will now give the floor over to Colin.
A decision support system, or a Shelterbelt Decision Support System. As Julia said, we have worked on shelterbelts and shelterbelt trees. I have a tree ring lab, and I'm part of the Afforestation group here on campus. And we do all things kind of trees, from boreal forest to shelterbelts. And over the last decade or so, we've been working intensively on shelterbelt trees, trying to understand the ecosystem and their benefits and how many they are and where they are. And if anybody was listening to us talk, the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Association sent out almost 1 billion trees to all these locations across the Prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, with the vast majority coming to Saskatchewan. And they started doing this in the early 1900s, and they sent them through. And after the dirty 30s, these shelterbelt trees really took off, and people really started to plant them. And in Saskatchewan, there was about 800,000 trees that went in and sent out to farmers. And we actually said, how are they doing? They started sending them out through all these years, and people have been planting them. And actually, how are they doing? And are we actually changing parts of the Saskatchewan? So what we did is we started to look into this. And of course, here comes somebody admitting. And of course, what we found out was there's actually a lot more trees out there than people were giving it credit for. And we started looking at the National Forestry Database, and they said, well, there's no trees in southern Saskatchewan. So we actually went out and we started measuring them, and we found that there's 63,000 kilometers of trees, one after another, in all these shelter belts. And we measured where they were and what kind of shelter belts they were. And we found out so much about them that we said, this is actually a lot of carbon that's being sequestered in there. And in the same time, a lot of farmers started taking out their shelter belts. And we said, there's a lot of good reasons to keep them, but they're saying, hey, there's a lot of good reasons to get rid of them. So that's why I did. And they go, well, have you thought about the good reasons to keep them? And again, they didn't have any. So part of our science was to say, here's some of these reasons why you should keep them. And then as we moved along, suddenly a lot of these buzzwords started coming. Now we're talking 2015, 2016, 2017. The federal carbon plan started coming in, and British Columbia moved to a carbon tax system, and Saskatchewan was really against it. Again, there's the provincial government kind of said, no, it's actually not a good thing for farmers. We're really heavy in carbon use in the sense of fertilizers, and the farming agricultural industry is bad for that. So we're not going to go there. We're not going to tax anything because it's just a farm tax. And so they started saying, we're going to do our own thing. And they started what they called the Saskatchewan's Prairie Resilience Plan. And that kind of morphed into what was called the Saskatchewan Growth Plan. And again, they focused on different aspects, but a key thing on the page 47, they were focusing on investments into carbon sequestration and how things that are out there that actually could be sequestering trees, and talking about these positives. And we're sitting there saying, trees, they're the ones that are kind of growing carbon. We can watch them grow carbon each year. And the other thing is that, contributions that are not recognized through the federal carbon tax. And again, this is those trees. These are the trees that are growing out in the prairies, especially in these shelter belts. And we're saying, this is where we have to do. We have to get out. We have to kind of show the other side of the coin. There's not just bad things with agriculture. If you're growing trees on your site, you can actually put in a lot of carbon into out of the atmosphere into these trees and into the surrounding soils. So we said, let's use these shelter belts. Let's try to show other landowners and other people and government agencies, that these shelter belts are there. They're storing carbon. And there's also many other benefits, saving heat if you put them around your house, and you're cutting down the wind, cutting down spray. There's so many other things. If you have cattle, putting them in there, helping to overwinter cattle. There's economics, and then there's social benefits. Some of these other social benefits we don't think about, but the natural effects like, habitat for birds, or all these other things that are there, or deer, or whatever happens to be in your the other kind of flora and fauna that surrounded some of these shaded locations. So a lot of that we wanted to look into. So what we did is we set out to build a tool. We've been studying it for a while, but we continue to study it on the landscape, and we wanted to send some kind of tool to give to these people, both the landowners who actually have some of these shelter belts, these 63,000 kilometers, they're on somebody's land, and in some cases well taken care of, and other times just allowed to grow. And then the governments, both the federal and the provincial, who weren't counting that. They didn't count that credit that could be going towards it, and couldn't be showing some of the offset that these other landowners are using, and not just some of the negative aspects when they're growing their crops adjacent to these shelter belts. Well, to do so, we needed to visit a lot of places. And so we needed a lot of grad students, a lot of undergrad students. Here's some, for example, going out with some of our equipment, shelter belts in the background. We would look for places that we wanted to go. We actually randomly selected where we wanted to go to keep our science good. And then we found a dot on a map. We went to that dot on a map where the PFRA database said we sent trees in, let's say, 1942 to this township and range and quarter section. Well, we can use Google Earth now, and we can go over there and say, hey, those trees are still growing there. Or we want to take some that are younger. How are they at 20 years? How are they at 10 years? How are they at 40 years, 60 years, 100 years? We tried to sample all the species we could, and we ended up with the 6 main species of white spruce, pine, like Scots pine, carigana, Manitoba maple, hybrid poplar, and green ash. Those are our 6 most common tree species they sent to everywhere across the province through time. And so those are the ones we wanted to try to study because we would hit the most people. We went out, we measured all kinds of parameters, like how tall are they? Here's Tierra out in a field with a little hypsometer to measure the heights of the trees. How much did they grow around? How, we would measure one after another. How tall are they? How much are they growing? We would go off and we would try to do this for each of those 6 species. As we were kind of talking earlier, here's a map sort of southern Saskatchewan where these trees don't grow. And we went around, and everywhere there's an X here, this is our white spruce map, where we went off and we tried to find white spruce that were growing, and we tried to measure them of all these different age categories. And we went across all the different soil zones. So, the black, the brown, the dark brown. Again, that soil is kind of a key to the growing environments, plus it reflects the long-term climate. And then there's differences in those climates. And so those differences are in our long-term climate are reflected in our different soil patterns. So we tried to cover all the southern Saskatchewan soil patterns, and we went to wherever we could find it. And as you can see here in white spruce, pretty rare to find it in some of these extreme dry southwest locations like south of Kindersley, Swift Current, until you get up more in a bit higher elevation in the Cypress Hills area. And if we did find some trees in these areas, it was usually because the landowners really took care of them. So they watered them quite heavy. They maybe fertilized them more than others. If they were sent there by PFRA in a long term, we hardly ever found any long-term trees still growing. They just died out. They weren't meant to grow in that area very well. This is kind of in that extreme dry sort of Palliser Triangle zone that some people call. And so other tree species are much better suited for that. But we went out trying to look specifically for all these age categories. And we ended up more or less covering the province in many different regions for all these different tree species. I'll show you another map of all of our zones coming up. Well, we went off, we measured in many different ways. Sometimes we were allowed to cut trees down. Landowners who actually said, yes, you can cut a tree down, or very often for Carigana, this is what Lindsay's cutting there too. We'd get a small section of it and we'd see how they've been growing through time. We also sometimes looked at how they're growing through time by taking these small increment cores. Each of these students here has a blue-handled increment core. We would slowly auger into a tree. We take out with about a small, it'd fit in a drinking straw, but sort of a pencil-sized increment. And in there we would have all the rings, and we can see how well those, in this case, hybrid poplar, have been growing through time. Each year they're putting on a new ring. Each year they're growing better and better. And we could assess in general how these trees were growing at that location, in that soil zone, under that climate, through time for as long as those trees were grown. And then we knew when they got sent there, and we could also check the age to make sure, maybe sometimes they're sent at 1 or 2 years old to the site. Then we would put all this information into computers. We would do a lot of computer modeling. We're not going to get into some of the deeper computer modeling, but I'll show you some of the kind of outputs that we had and some of the difficulties we had of taking our highfalutin science and put it into something that someone can actually understand and use as they move in the future. We actually did a lot of economic stuff too. Each of these folders represents a survey that went out to landowners. And in these surveys, all kind of locked away in a cabinet after we got permission to actually ask our questions, we had all these questions, and it ended up starting to become a small survey, but it got bigger and bigger as we went through time. We asked more and more questions about the landowners, and in the end, we had about 350 to 450 surveys come back. So from an economic standpoint, we had a good idea of the kinds of things. Do you have shelter belts on your land? When were they put in? Where did you get your trees? Where would you get more if you wanted to? Just showing the knowledge of the landowners and saying what they had. What kind of things did you do to the land? Do you hoe around them? Do you just leave them grow? Do you ever fertilize? Do you ever water them? Trying to figure out how much, and maybe are they growing better because these landowners are taking care of their trees more than maybe somebody else. In the end, here's kind of our big map of all of our study sites with a dot on them, all the different soil zones, the gray, the black, brown, dark brown, all the different areas that we went to. Again, randomly selected, but we tried to get all the different species in all the different locations so that we had a good smattering across these different soil zones. And then we understood the conditions that we were going to encounter. Then we put it all into a model, and we're going to go into the model very shortly. and I'm going to show it to you online. We're going to just kind of play with it live tonight. But before we get there, just in case the whole audience doesn't actually understand, just to give you some background, here's an example of a hybrid poplar row, a row of trees growing one after another sort of thing. And there's a more older hybrid poplar willow, and right beside of it, another row of green ash. So this would be, we would consider this 2 rows species, and we'd have different kinds of parameters that you can have, 1 row, 2 row, single row, triple row. Sometimes you had like caraganas on the outside. Sometimes they're around farms. Sometimes they're around feedlots. Sometimes they're out in the middle of a field. So these are the kinds of things that we studied, all of the above. We also did many kinds of, classic forestry measurements to do that. And here we have Brooke with her back to us, but she's measuring most of our trees. Again, the technical term is DBH height, or that chest height, that sort of 1.3 meters from the ground. That's usually where we measured our circumference, or how thick the trees are around. And we created what we call allometric curves, how the height and diameter curves, so that we knew how the trees were growing in different areas and how they were responding to different treatments like weeding or fertilizer or watering and no watering in that zone. And here's Brooke sort of measuring how fat the tree is, at that 1.3 meters from the ground upwards. And the other picture next to it just shows kind of a classic 2 rows. There's actually multi-rows here, 3 or 4 rows. But the other thing that we have on here is just the spacing from 1 row to another row spacing, and then from one tree to the next tree in a row. How far was that spacing? When they originally got most of the trees, the PFRA sent some planting rules with things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if someone gives you some good directions, it doesn't mean that always people would follow them. And sometimes when you're getting a little twig, you're not thinking about 20 years later, this little twig will be a big tree. You're thinking, oh my goodness, it's so small. And in general, they tended to grow them a little closer than they were asked to. And so sometimes these trees tend to grow into each other more like a hedgerow than a shelter belt of trees going across. The other thing that is kind of common, and maybe you'll see in this picture of some spruce, there's the back row, it's in the black kind of arrows, and then the front row and the white row. So they'd offset them maybe 5 meters apart and then put the offset rows. So it created more of a complete barrier, and it was one way that PFRA asked people to sometimes do it. And if you had enough trees coming and you have enough space that you're allocating around in your shelter belt, you'd often do this. And so we kind of measured those systems too, to try to give them a slightly different type of shelter belt that we did our best to measure. And then what we did is we created this model, and this model is found here, the decision support system here at the shelterbelt-sk.ca, and it's live on the web and anybody can use it and it's free. We also created sort of our shelterbelt@usask email for anybody to email us any questions. And then we have a lot of our more technical information on our Sask Agroforestry website. And associated with that is also my tree ring lab, the MAD lab. I talked about that a couple days ago, so we'll let that one go for now. But the Center for Northern Agroforestry and Afforestation, this is where we did a lot of our work. Since about the year 2000, it's been running, and I'm currently one of the head of it. So everything sort of comes back to me in either of these labs. But we're going to go off and take a look at that right now. So we're going to go off to this website. So let me just pop out of this. Oops. Wrong one. And I'm going to pull up the website. Okay, did that come across? You're on the website now. You're seeing? Yeah. This is the Shelterbelt DSS website. It's again at MadLab. This address will change, but if you type in the other one I gave you, you'll get right here, and you'll find it on Google search engines or whatever. We tried to put all shelter belt information that we could. We got a lot of calls over the decade from people asking us all kinds of questions. So these are just some of the in the news things that we had. Maybe some news reports that were something. Here's something in the Western Producer, for example. And then you can click and go and see the Western Producer thing that they did on us. Or you can go back and you can see even in these Shelterbelt references. So things like primer, some of the general things about Shelterbelts in Saskatchewan, or climate change, if somebody's asked some information on that, or how trees store carbon. You can click on any of these and you'll go to another explanation, some additional information you can click on, or else some resources that you can get, just to give some people, if they're interested in more information, where to go. We tended to get a lot of different questions, again, like where to buy trees for Shelterbelts. Well, you can click that and you can see these are the places in Saskatchewan where you can go to. Shan Greenhouse is really one of the places offering the most free help, but you can go through some of these other private ones, and I don't know, even get into some of these other, I'll click on this one and see, you can just some links to go to some of these things that maybe are better. Again, Prince Albert, Weyburn, Estevan, Alberta, you can go to any of these kind of to see where you might want to go. And that, again, answers some of the questions that people have about these things. We also made quite a few YouTube videos, especially video tutorials, how to use some of our equipments, our models. Again, many videos, you can sit here and watch them one by one and kind of get all the way up to final videos on 15, but I can give you a tour of them very much like the videos will be too. Many students, many people worked on this over the years. Again, some of the main PEIs, and myself was included in there, but some of our postdocs, some of our staff, our computing teams, lots of summer students and current master's and PhD students who have done things. You can kind of see their names, and by no means what I'm going to show you is my work. It is our work. In fact, most of the other people in here did most of the work. If you want to know about budgeting and talking about audits for that, then you can maybe talk to me, but many of the experts are here on here, and I will give you a tour of some of their work. So this is a link going over to the Center for Northern Agroforestry and Afforestation. That's, again, where a lot more of our data is and our kind of sciencey research. We found that we had a lot of questions from the government, actually. We were well ahead of the government in knowing what they even have on their own province. So if you went to our Shelterbelt database, we started giving them databases. That's what they often wanted, some of our data. So if you go in here, we had suitability analysis, shrub analysis, carbon stocks under different climate change scenarios, and they're all downloadable, and it'll be very, very sciencey. We'll put into a Microsoft database stuff. Some of our references are there to go with it, but amazing how many researchers, how many private companies asking us for this database. And again, we just give it to everybody the same free, and we do our best to help. This is the planner tool. We'll go into there in a minute, and then some of the references. If you're interested in learning more about some of these references, how trees store carbon, climate change, fact sheets. Again, many of these things have just embedded many more aspects of things you can click on and just get a picture of it, download stuff, leave some, get some more information, basically. I'm going to close that, go back. So back to the tutorial. So here we are. So the next maybe 20 minutes, these are our main two tools. One's a Shelterbelt planning tool. This is if you want to plan something in the minute, and this is an evaluation tool if I have an existing Shelterbelt. So if you want to plan now, and we're going to plan now, and I'm going to take you on a little tour, we're just going to go and click there. Right off the bat, you can actually see this is just a map of everywhere in Saskatchewan. There's our borders there from border to border, and from Prince Albert National Park up here down into the States. And you can go and search any place you want in there, and you can search by legal land description or longitude and latitude if you feel like it. But in our case, I'm going to go over to the George Genereux Park, and we're just going to type in Saskatoon. Oops, if I can spell it correctly. Saskatoon, search. And then it quickly just zooms right into Saskatoon. And there we are, a map of Saskatoon. I'm going to zoom out a bit. You can kind of just zoom in and out with your mouse. I'm going to go over to this area. There's the rail yards. There's the other park that's part of this group. And I think we'll go over here to this one. This is I believe, the George Genereux site, right? Just off of the highway.
That's right.
So if you want to actually pretend we want to draw, or we want to have 2 rows of Shelterbelt trees all around the whole thing, and we would toggle on to the drawing, and we would, then all of a sudden a little button will come here and say, let's start drawing. So we can start to draw. You can see it's 0.74 of a kilometer, and you can take that little highway section in there and you can draw any shape you want. And if I do this right, when I come to the end, I double click and there it is. It's got a complete kind of section off. You're going to start to do that. You can clear the drawing and redraw if you didn't like it, but that's close enough for the time being. The length is already, it tells you 2.99 kilometers. So we've got about a 3 kilometer shelter belt we want to put in there. It gives us our directions. So now let's plan our shelter belt. So we're going to click a button over here, plan our shelter belt. How many, right off the bat, how many rows do you want to go? I'm going to say, we're going to put in 2, and we're going to put in something like, white spruce. We talked about that tonight, and maybe green ash. And then we're going to calculate it. So it's going to recalculate some of the information, and we'll go through it here. I just want to see if we can see the whole thing on my screen. Okay, that's a bit better. So there's our location. There are 2.99 kilometers. Deciduous species are optimal, it's telling you. So this is the optimal species that are made for your location. And again, the suitability of white spruce is average, 0.4 to 0.6 for your location. Suitability goes from 0, really bad, to 1, just wonderful. For the green ash, the suitability is strong, so 0.6 to 0.8, so it's a little bit better. Right off the bat, we kind of tell you a little bit about what's in our neighborhood, who's growing what in your neighborhood. Again, we've done the whole province, and so we know who's close to you. And close to us is in about 10 kilometers. So every 10 kilometers, we can tell you roughly, in percentage-wise, how many people are in the field, about 20%. Most people have about 80% around their farmyards. And so now you know. For yours, it would be different. It would be around a whole field. So you'd be joining sort of this group. Shelter belt species are, coniferous is over here. There's the shrubs, so that's more or less carigana. Here's the coniferous, about 13%. And the vast majority, 65% of them are the deciduous trees. The conditions of the shelter belts, how well are they growing right now? So it's good, fair, poor, good for most of them. Most are doing really well. So most are deciduous and most are around people's houses, and they're all doing quite well. Fair, there's some that are not doing very well at all, but it's a small percentage. So in most cases, there's a very small percentage are doing poor. So most are doing really well in that area. So yours will probably be doing well in that kind of area if you planted them. Again, we know the shapes of them. Most of them are straight, about 66%. There's some L-shaped, and then some that are bracketed, so they might have a little pieces on either side. And there's a small slither of other. So others might be, let's say yours, which are zigzag shapes and all those other shapes. We can see them from the air, so we've mapped them, but they're not as common. So what you have is pretty rare, and that's what this is sort of telling you. Again, most of them are straight, and on ours, we're going to do more straight too. We're going to do some nice straights around the General Park. The width of them, most are kind of narrow, 1 and 2 rows. So either 1 row or 2 rows are the most common around your sites. There are a few more of 3 to 4 rows and pretty rare 5+ rows. So again, we now know what your neighbors are doing and what you could potentially be doing too. And so you're fitting in the 2 rows, you're going to be doing what most people are doing. And again, most are going about half are north-south and about half east-west. So, this is pretty common. Yours are going to do north-south, east-west in all directions around your site. So you'd be adding to this kind of thing. And then the age of the shelter belts in your area. The majority of them, the count, like a little over 10,000 we have in your area, are over in that 21 to 30 area. Some are in that 60 plus, but only about 615 plants that we have estimated. And we can go through and you can see each one will come up and tell you how many plants in that age category. Again, 10,000 in the 20 to 30 age. It's the most common thing in your area, okay? So really cool, right? Now let's continue a bit and go on to the next page. So here we have some farmers are really worried about, well, if I plant it in there, am I going to take away from, in this case, the park, or take away from my acreages? Well, we've calculated that if you plant what you're going in here, it'll take away about 11.8 or 12 acres away from your field. Or if you want to do square meters, here it is, 48,000 square meters kind of thing that you're taking up by planting this 2.9 or 3 kilometer shelter belt around your zone. If you plant, you will need, or we estimate you'll need 853 white spruce at a minimum, and we recommend for best practice to plant them 3.5 meters apart. Again, suitability for your location is average. It's not outstanding, it's not really strong, it's just average for the white spruce right now. Green ash, if you look, it's a little stronger. We recommend 1,200 green ash, recommending a few more if you want to do that just as a precaution. And again, 2.5 meters apart for your rows of green ash. Again, different species grown at different spacings to optimize the spacings, to optimize the area that they will be when they get mature. Overall, if you keep going down, how well have the trees grown in the past? And how well are they going to grow in the future? You can see that we have a timeline and years across the bottom here. We have roughly since 1950. Here we are at 2020, and we go up to 2100 more or less. And we have a line here. This red line is the average growth. Average is 1, above average and below average. So in certain times, in this case for white spruce, they were growing a little bit below average for the province. This is where we're talking about up over here. They were average more or less right now in 2020. But as you move forward, you can see there's 2 lines, a green line and a blue line, and these are climate change scenarios. So we looked at climate change in the future. We know how the trees grew in the past under that climate. We took climate change scenarios and forecasted in the future our best guesstimate of how we're going to grow in the future. Now, an RCP of 5 or 4.5, you can look in our video tutorials to see what that means, or in some of our other things. But what it means is a more conservative future where we're not going to get too hot too fast. But an RCP of 8 means we're going to get really hot, drier, more droughts, more floods, a little bit more extremes in the weather. And if you look off into the future, by the time you get into like 2075 and some of these time periods, these trees aren't growing as well. They're getting down, 30% reduction in growth. And down here by 2100, they're down actually, 20, 30%. None of them are average or above average anymore. And so this is why we're predicting, if you go into the future for white spruce, if you want to plant some for future generations, maybe that's not the key species. You might go to something like green ash. They've been doing at the average or better. And as they move into the future, both in the more general climate scenarios or more extreme climate scenarios, you can see for a longer period of time on the 2050s, they're actually doing quite well. This is that deciduous trees, and this is why we think they're going to do better in time. So maybe we want to change that. We can say, oh, seeing that, I don't like white spruce as much anymore. What about hybrid poplar? Let's do a hybrid poplar and green ash. There's another deciduous, and we could recalculate. Now all of a sudden we need 1,100 hybrid poplars, 2.5 meters across. This one hasn't changed. And now if you look at hybrid poplar, oh, there we are. Over this location, just outside Saskatoon, they've been growing closer to average. And if you look in the future growth, there's going to be some really good years and they're going to do a lot better. And on average, they're going to be much closer to this than those white spruce that we picked in our first scenario. And so you start to say to yourself, well, hey, are we as programmers telling you to go out and pick this species? No, we're giving you the information. We're giving you the support to allow you to make a better decision for what you might think will grow better in the future. And this is what we're trying to do. Again, we're not trying to be preachy. We're just trying to give each landowner their own advice for their own location based on sort of that communal knowledge that everybody else around is doing. And then our science is embedded inside this. We did all the modeling. We did all the climate change scenarios, and we put it in a format that we hope that the average landowner can use. we took this model, early versions of this model, to farm shows, out on the road. We got people's feedback. They were telling us, this is too complex. I would not stay that long. These are the kinds of things that we try to make it so that we fit our clientele, that they would each use it. So if you like that, we will continue along. We will go to sort of a summary page, and we'll talk about the carbon involved and the economic information about the hybrid poplar, how much live carbon is in there. And you can see that through time, if you were to plant that in all these years, these trees would start to grow. And over the age, all the way up to 60 years in the future, we've estimated it, you can see under these two climate scenarios, again, a more generalized and a more extreme. The generalized does better, and the extreme in this case is not as much carbon. And we tell you how much tons of carbon, CO2 equivalent, you're putting in there. We can go into annual carbon release. We can see how that changes through time. We can look at dollar value. You can change it to dollar value. And again, you can actually change this dollar value, but we looked at the Canadian dollar value that's associated with the federal government carbon plan and how that changes through time. So that suddenly, if you were growing all this and you tried to put it in carbon equivalents, in 46 years, it would be roughly worth $40,000 of carbon equivalents. And when you start to tell farmers and landowners suddenly, hey, your hybrid poplars alone would be worth $40,000 in 46 years, they all sudden, well, wait a second, maybe I won't rip out those ones I have now because they're actually worth something. And when you show this to the federal government, they say exactly what we've been saying. Talk to the provincial government and say, well, that's really quite interesting. Maybe we should have farm credits for that, because a farm or a forest at a farm that's worth $30,000 or $40,000, if you leave it in the ground, changes people's perspectives, especially if you're giving them a year by year carbon equivalent and how much money that goes up year by year. And that's how we calculate it. Again, we can do the same thing for green ash. You click on green ash, you get a slightly different dollar value. Not as much biomass is being put into that. And again, hybrid poplar is one of the best and fastest growing species. So you're putting a lot more above ground carbon, and then below ground carbon is in there too. So this is a kind of, you can do that for both species. Just click back and forth. It'll show you that thing, switch from dollar value to total stored carbon. And you can kind of just see the different values. And then there's carb calculation. So planting the shelter belt will consume approximately 11.84. So again, the economics people on our team went in and calculated what's the carbon footprint to grow that seedling, transport that seedling from Shand greenhouse to your site here in Saskatoon. And then for seedling development, transportation, and planting, that's what your carbon footprint would be. But you would recoup it after a few years because you would be having tons of carbon coming up in the stored biomass and in the soils. And then the closest hub for you for pickup would likely to be Saskatoon. And that's how Shand Greenhouse works. They send it off to these hubs, and you'd have to drive from Saskatoon to Saskatoon to get your trees, and then you could go out and plant them. So those are the kinds of things that we have in that section. I want to keep going to show you kind of keep going, but I could talk more. And then we have sort of a summary page with everything in there, best practices, our different models in there. And if you want to, you can hit this print all, or print different parts, the plan or the carbon plan, how much to buy, or some of your carbon plans. Hit print, all of it will come to a print. You can print to a PDF or off on your thing. In this case, I'll cancel it, save a couple trees, and then all that information will be there for you to go back and look at, or again, just change different tree species and play around with it and switch one to Caragana, recalculate and see how that changes things, how many Caragana sticks you'll need, will they work well in your location, all those kinds of things. Green ash, we did, our Caragana, we didn't actually do. It's really hard to see the past growth rates. And so it's not a very long model, so it's not on there. But all the other species I'll show you, and then you can basically plan your shelter belt. And again, not telling you what to do. It's up to each individual owner to decide what they want to do just by playing on our website. So I want to go back to this and show you the second part, this evaluate a current shelter belt. So again, click on that. There we go. I'll toggle on the drawing. It's on already. And then I'll go search a location. So in this case, we'll go to somewhere else. I know we went here to often go, so I'm just going to go to Duck Lake, Saskatchewan. You can type in Duck Lake and boom, there you go. It goes and finds it. And there's the thriving metropolis of Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, right along sort of north of Rostern and just before Prince Albert down the highway. But if you go straight north, there's this site over here that we often use. You can zoom in a bit. This is the one where I start to go. So click to start drawing. You can see this right along the road. It was a 2-row shelter belt. Hey, got it the first try. Okay, good. So there's evaluation. We'll click. We will want to evaluate this farmer's location. This is the actual farmer. He gave us the permission to go and do some measurements on there. So we have it, and he could be doing this exact same thing, or I guess their family. First thing we want to do is tell how much carbon you think carbon is worth, whether it's $20 or $40 a ton right now. So you can put that in there. Your age, if you know what things are, and your spacings. I think in this case it was 2 meters for the Caragana and 4 meters for the green ash. That's what I believe we had. The age here for the Caraganas, they were both put in. They're both about, I think, 42 years. Mortality is how many are died. And I'm just going to do, I think it's in 5%. And this one, a few more died, 10%. And again, they're 42 years old too. And spacing, so we're going to submit that. It might not work for a second because I have to tell it 2 rows, Caragana and green ash. Yeah. And the other thing I have to do is tell it circumference. So the Caraganas are 45 centimeters, let's say, and for the green ash is 88 centimeters. So as soon as you put that information in, up will come all this information already about your shelter belt. You have all these different things you can do. You can click anything you want on or off. This is like the regional shelter belts and your shelter belts. So this is like the regional average for how much, in this case, Caragana aren't doing well compared to the region. Again, I just made all this up, but you can actually go to your farm, measure your own trees and put that up. If you ever want to switch to the other tree, you can say green ash is in your other row. This is just it. Different aspects of it. You can turn all 6 lines on if you like it. Some of the people who took our things said, oh, there's too many lines, just give me one at a time. So we gave them the ability to click on anything they want, either just your stuff or all your regional stuff or your shelter belts total or your shelter belts live carbon. And again, total regional average. This is the DOM is the dead organic matter. So this is like in the first few years, your trees aren't growing too much and they're not adding too much to the surrounding soil. But as they start to shed their leaves and their branches and they break down and start to add to the soil, you start to get that soil carbon in there. So there's components that start to add into that, or your Shelterbelt's live carbon. Again, my numbers are kind of off, but just showing you roughly how much carbon in there, or dollar values, how much dollar values you're going to go at your age, where your trees are at, how much carbon they're actually accumulating already there, and how much is it worth. These are the kinds of aspects that you can start to have. And again, you can play with this. If you don't like this scenario, you can go to a more extreme scenario, change the climate scenarios in the future of how they're growing. It'll recalculate, and many times it gets hotter and drier for most parts of Saskatchewan, and so the trees don't do as well. So again, lots to play with. I'm just cognizant of my time, so I'm a little bit rushing here, but cognizant of my time, that you get to play with. How many rows do you actually have? What species are there? Just go out and measure that circumference. Go to 1.3 and take your circumference, and we'll get it into the diameters, and we'll do the calculations in the background. Tell us how old your trees are. Many people know. If not, you can leave it blank and it'll still do it based on your age and your size of your trees and your diameter. We'll be able to tell you you're probably about 45-year-old trees. Because why? We've measured so many around the province over 10 years of summers measuring people's trees. We can guess in that area of Duck Lake, for example, what's actually probably growing in your area. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna go back, just show you one more time again. These are all the tools. We tried to put all the tools in one place for landowners to use or people who are planning to use as much information as we can. We've been really successful in actually breaking that bridge down to our provincial government. The scientists love it. The policymakers are the ones that are really hard to convince, but even they're starting to look into it. And as we move into more of a carbon economy, especially maybe even with the election last night, we got another few years here now with the our provincial government having to work with a Liberal Party in Ottawa, and maybe some things will get changed, and maybe one of them could be some kind of carbon policy that we have coming on, that our tools and our information and our data sets can start to be used. That's about it. We've got a little less than 15 minutes usually, but about 10 minutes left to talk. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd be really happy to answer any kind of questions that somebody might have.
That was so exciting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. So I'm so excited to see this come to fruition. It's so wonderful. Just a question, if you're going to continue adding species to the calculator?
Oh, we would love to. We're asking for money right now, but so far we don't have any more money. So we had 2 5-year projects back to back, and with government changes, we were looking like we were going to get our next thing, and then the pandemic hit. And so there's a lot of money going out, and now not as much money going to things like this. So we hope that more programs will come out, especially as we come out of the pandemic, that we can apply for, so we can do more species. Again, PFRA sent out 28 species. We've done 6. And we know that there's more out there. There's so much more to do with shrubs. There's so much more to do with berry crops. We've got partners, we've got First Nation groups who really want to work with us when something like this, but to put up shrub belts so they could be harvesting some of these fruits, thinking from native things like Saskatoons to I guess non-native, but kind of Saskatchewan, the cherries, the hascaps that are coming out of some of these projects. They'd be having ecological benefits and also kind of a food security benefits for some of these First Nation communities. So we think that it's fundable. We just haven't got the funding yet to move forward to the next step,
Okay, thank you. I think that's great, because I see the calculator, and after already designing and promoting some eco buffer shelter belts with people, I just know that lots of people will see the shelter belt planner and just stick to those species just because it'll be in their comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm hoping you guys get that funding and add more. Yeah.
The hard part about it, we're true scientists in the sense that we don't want to give anybody the bad information, but it's highly likely that most other shrubs will be very similar to Carigana, and you can find other species that are more or less similar to things like, an elm tree to an ash tree. They're not that far. They grow very similar. And so there's others out there. And if anybody ever sends me an email, I usually reply that to them. But, we also don't want to give information where we don't actually have that information yet. We quickly found out we actually started with 9 tree species at first, and then it just became too overwhelming to do all the combinations of them. And in our second funding, we didn't get as much as we asked for, but we had enough to do 6 species, so we kept going with those 6.
Awesome.
And most common, so those are the ones we put our money behind there, just because it's the most common.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have an estimate of what percentage of shelter belts remain or have been taken out?
We developed a system of looking at it from space and looking at imagery at different years. And then we created a computer algorithm to look at the same location. And we used Outlook. We have actually a paper on that where we published how to do it. And we tried to tell the federal government, please do it so that we can watch from year to year, because you can get all this satellite data really inexpensive or free or whatever, right? It's in their area to do it. And here's the algorithm to use it. Please use it. We've done it for about 6 years, from 2015 to 5 years, 2015 to 2020. We calculated everything and we could see it. And we used the Outlook area because the Outlook area was one of those areas where we saw and we were on the ground seeing lots of landowners taking out their shelter belts. Again, through our surveys, we asked them why. And for most people, they were saying it's because our equipment is getting so big and these shelter belts are in the way. We can gain 1 or 2 more acres if we take that one out, and we can gain 10 acres if we take them all out. And our computer-driven tractors will drive better and program easier if we don't have that field shelter belt in there. And then something like this year, especially when the drought hit, now they're saying, oh, my crops aren't doing very well where I took out that shelter belt. And so they're seeing the other side of the coin finally. We ran through a pretty good time in the 2010s of pretty good crops year after year. And then suddenly when the droughts hit, they're seeing the benefits of where they had shelter belts and where they didn't, and how those crops actually matured so much better in those areas because they held their moisture better. They had more moisture to start out with because they trapped more snow. It melted slower, went into the ground better, and they had a higher soil moisture content. We don't preach soil moisture content, but that's the thing that's sort of driving the tree growth a lot, and our models do that. What I showed you here, our climate change scenarios, in the future, how that's going to go for different climate change scenarios, that's showing again soil moisture, that combination of the heat and the rain all trapped into one component, and we put that into our models. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, and is it still being, I mean, you said you use trade shows and so on to perfect this tool. Is it still being promoted at all in that way, or just?
It is, but most of it are trade shows, I guess, or farm shows, or things are like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
It's to on a Zoom, often recorded, played to their membership, and this is for Sask Organics. This is for fruit orchard people. This is for various groups, the canola group or something like that. Those are the kind of groups that ask us to talk. We talk. Somebody, you'll hear us. A Western producer saw your list of things, and I got a phone call last week. We have counters on our websites too, and so whenever something comes out in the media, whenever something like this happens, tomorrow, the next few days, we'll start to see more counts, more people clicking on the Shelterbelt DSS, and they'll go up, and we'll kind of watch where they go, and we'll see that. And every time we have maybe something come out in the media, we'll see that. Or we'll ask a federal government or a government agency may ask for us provincial, and then a couple days later, we'll see a bunch of clicks coming out of Regina, that kind of thing. And so it's going out there slowly. Is it as good as a big farm show with hundreds of people? No. But pandemic is hitting us in that way. And as the researchers disseminating our science, it's hitting that too.
That's so wonderful that you're doing this extension aspect, because so many of the times research just stays inside the ivory tower, and this is so wonderful to make it accessible to people.
Yeah.
And did you just say though that you got a call from Western Producer because of our promotion? Oh, that's
Absolutely.
nice. That's wonderful to hear. Oh, that's great.
That's wonderful. And he is a Western Producer writer, and he's putting it in some kind of magazine. So I've done a couple of talks, and I shared the PowerPoints on the slides I was getting ready for you guys. I shared it with him. So as soon as I get a link, he's going to send me a link when it goes out. I can send it back to you, and I can directly attribute it to Julia's promotion, I guess.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that we weren't totally useless in getting promotion.
Yeah, it was from the Friends. Yeah, I was just doing it on behalf of the Friends of the Afforestation area. I have another question for you. sometimes when I read past newspaper articles about Richard St. Barr-Baker and about how he promoted shelter belt planting for the Sahara Desert, the green belt there, he said that the shelter belt should be planted in a spiral fashion, and especially if you were a cattle farmer, then the cows could like roam around in the shelter belt in the spiral design. And yet most of our farmers in Saskatchewan are just periphery or around their home or something. Have you ever heard of a spiral shelter belt before?
Not really, but I know that in another aspect of agroforestry, where you're actually mixing the cattle with the crops, they do it a lot more in Europe, Africa, some areas of the States. And if they do it in Canada, it's usually in British Columbia, around that Merritt area, where they plant trees that will grow fast to harvest the trees. So it's a little bit different worlds. But again, if you're trying to, he was trying to specifically create an area for forage in a really harsh growing environment. So I can see why he was thinking outside the box. In Saskatchewan, as soon as we started making those 1 mile boxes with quarter sections in between, we really moved into that north-south world. You see that in some of our databases and the kind of things we have, everything sort of north-south, east-west, following along, a road allowance road, everything that they kind of made for our land system, everything follows to a T. And, and if you see that they split, fields down the middle kind of thing, if you see a field shelter belt, it's pretty rare to see the others, but there are a few out there. Again, you see more often in some of those really interesting areas, or if there's like a wetland there or something, then they'll do that sometimes. But I haven't seen too many other spirals, but it was interesting when I actually looked on Google Earth at your sites and then sort of saw them, quite interesting.
What's the, this is sort of a personal question, but my great uncle, when he started the homestead, I think 1890, and he planted rows of spruce. And I don't know whether he took them out of the native bush because we have native white spruce on the farm, or whether he got them for PFRA. But he planted them in 2 rows that are only about 3 or 4 feet apart. And in the rows, they were sometimes just 1 to 2 feet. But, they grew. I only had an estimate by having my wife hold a 10-foot rod and then taking a picture and estimating it that way. But they were almost 90 feet tall at over 100 years of age. And I've never seen spruce like that picture you had of spruce where they're dead underneath. It was like that, but they were even way, way closer together, and they just went up because we had enough moisture. And it's unusual.
Yeah, it's probably the most prized species of any tree out there. If anybody, they plant them on the inner part of their shelter belts around the houses, and this is where your grad pictures and your wedding pictures are taken, and everybody, they spend more time with the white spruce. And so if you're in a zone where they can still grow quite native, they're probably doing fantastic. The PFRA, I think it was 1908, they started sending out, and their first tree species was white spruce. So it could be, or 1903 or 1908, I'm trying to remember back, but their very first species was white spruce, and they started sending them out. So that was the first that they were able to take native stock and actually start to get them to grow to be able to send out. So it's very possibly, but if they did, many people like the shelter belts too. So it could have been just took them from the native forest and planted them in rows, and they just kept adding to it year after year. But they're just beautiful, nice conifers. They're there all year long. They're helping you all year long, kind of protecting your yard. And so that's why most people like them too. Heights, those are fantastic heights, especially for planting that close. In a native forest, some of them, they would self-start. They start weeding themselves out, and some would die for some reasons, and others, and too much competition is a bad thing. But you never know. Maybe he weeded and they watered, and in the dry years, they helped their trees grow in the 30s and stuff like that. And once they're growing well and they're getting everything they need, they can grow quite dense. So we see that in plantation forests all over the north still. Yeah.
That's interesting. Why would our afforestation areas have two different kinds of growth of spruce? On the east side, we have the mature 50-year-old spruce, and then we have a whole bunch of really crowded saplings. And then on the other side of the afforestation area, we have the really dense spruces, like what we were just talking about, where they're really close to kind of a bit of dieback at the bottom. So it's kind of weird when they were all planted at the same time and yet have two different kinds of growth patterns.
Yeah, again, I think we were talking about that earlier before. Just because PFRA said send this out, 1970, then they did a bunch of tests and they said, well, actually, that was a little too close. So now let's change our pamphlet and say 3 meters instead of 2.5. And then some people would say, oh, 2.5 meters, that looks pretty far. I'm going to plant them a little closer, or I'm going to make a nice spiral pattern. Who cares? It's ours. And so what people did, and also sometimes their help, you might say, oh, I've got 500 trees to plant. I don't want to do it alone. We need a whole crew to come out. And all of a sudden, some Brownie Club or a Boy Scout club came out to help them. And then next thing you know, not everyone's planted as best that they could have, but they did as much help as they could. And it was better than, I'm doing them all alone or something. So we found that no matter where we traveled, you get that kind of thing where some people, oh yeah, they just seem like they should have gone like this. So that's what we did. And, if they're too close, we water more, that kind of stuff. So that happens a lot.
Nice. Thank you.
There was a plantation along the Trans-Canada, I think near Mortlach. Did you ever investigate that?
There's a few of them. I'm more familiar with the one, between Saskatoon and Regina. So with the David in there. There's one, there's a couple of them.
Yeah.
Plantations that people are trying to put on there to try to sequester carbon or for different things. And so we visited a few of them again, but we tried to randomize as much as we can. And we were trying to, because those kind of plantations are quite rare, we spent most of our time traveling to things that would add to our database to see the general patterns of what we would get across a landscape. But if we ever saw those things, the crew would stop and look at them or see what they have, the demonstration forestry kind of aspects. But when we were actually visiting, we went to very specific farms and we had to find phone numbers for those farms and contact the person and say, can we come next Thursday? And this is what we're going to measure. And is there any scary dogs? And, are you going to show up with a shotgun? If we pull up, we're going to be driving a white truck with the, and we're going to have the U of S on the side of it, that kind of thing. Just because, nowadays, especially some of these rural communities, you just don't go up on people's lands and knock on the door as much as you used to. So we had a lot of precautions from our permitting kind of agencies to take good care, and then we had to phone and contact the landowners to get permission. And then often we needed their help because we left them with our surveys to find out things like the economics. How much time do you spend in it? How many acres? So we have a whole kind of suite of economic things that are also embedded inside the model from our survey data.
Dr. Colin Laroque, on behalf of everyone here today,
this planning tool, I'm just amazed because when I was at Indian Head, we used to send out 4 people all summer long all across Saskatchewan and Manitoba to plan farm shelter belts and field shelter belts. And with this kind of tool, they could have done it. People could have done it just
it is also the era
split.
where nature-based solutions
Well, we're seeing that in a certain
climate
sense,
changes,
a slight change in our demographics.
The depth
for some
of
of the,
understanding and research.
I'll call them
put
older
into a
generation, or
compact,
like me with the gray hair or something. They
interface is
like the
something we
pamphlets,
can
they
all
like the written
benefit from
documents.
immediately.
And some of the newer people, they grab their
This
phone or
subject
iPad and
intrigues
quickly
me
go
greatly,
on and do it.
And I
And so we
indeed
try to
plan
find a
learn
hybrid
more
again. So
and explore
if
the
you liked it,
potential
maybe
of the
your
Shelterbelt
son or
Decision
daughter
Support
could
app
do this for you, and then they could
and
hit print and
internet
they print something
resources,
out, and then you could
as
read
I
it
hope others
and you could
will
see a
also.
graph too.
This
That
was a
came
very
across in our
memorable
kind of
evening
farm shows, that
and
that was
certainly
important at the end to
inspirational.
print something off,
And we
because I
thank
don't
you
read things
for
online
what
very
you do
well. I
for
read
others
things
in
and I
our
sit in my
community.
favorite chair and
Once again,
after
on
after
behalf
the
of the
supper or
Friends of the
something, I do the
Saskatoon
dishes, and then that's
Afforestation
when I
Areas,
read,
Inc.
and that's when I want to do it.
Thank
I don't
you.
want to look at a screen, And so we try to find that happy medium of finding a way of doing that. And there's nothing wrong with either way as far as that we're concerned, but it's trying to get that information to the people who will use it. And how can we get it to as many people as possible? Well, we ended up going to online format because, again, more people are driving that way. Even my mom and dad have an email now, right? So they're not fast on getting there, but they have their hunt and peck method, and they're getting more and more familiar with the interweb.
Afforestation areas
So,
were also planted under the advisement of the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, and so they also showed the characteristics discovered in the Shelterbelt Decision Support app. The afforestation areas are now 50 years old and are no longer tree nurseries, as the trees are mature and too large for transplanting by the City of Saskatoon Parks Department. However, the afforestation areas are a unique destination for outdoor activities. Welcome to these two urban regional parks in Saskatoon, the Richard St. Barbaker Afforestation Area and George Jennery Urban Regional Park, where you can enjoy the amazing secrets of birds and animals amid a man-made forest on the prairies. During National Forest Week, enjoy greenery and birdsong, the delightful autumnal colors of the leaves changing, and a perfect place to wonder at the beauties of hoarfrost and rye mice in the winter. Come explore, sit under your favorite tree, and take time to watch the ducks on the West Swale wetlands. A great exploration opportunity exists during National Forest Week, or any time you wish to get outside and immerse in nature. Hope to see you out there. The roses would like to meet you.